Despite an unqualified apology for the ills of apartheid, many South Africans have mixed feelings about FW de Klerk. In the wake of his death, the FW de Klerk Foundation has released a pre-recorded video, his last message to the nation. He's credited with dismantling apartheid and bringing about reforms that included the release of political prisoners such as Nelson Mandela and the unbanning of political organizations like the ANC and the PAC. His speech at the opening of the 1990 session of Parliament marked the official end of segregation policies and the official start of the negotiations that led to a constitutional democracy. Now, Executive Director of the FW de Klerk Foundation, Dave Steward, PAC President Mzwanele Nyhontso, and former anti-apartheid activist Father Michael Lapsley are joining us now live from the mother city just to talk to us as we reflect on de Klerk's legacy. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Stewart, if I may start with you. By now, you've heard a number of reactions since yesterday's passing of Mr. de Klerk. What's your sense where the country is at in recognizing Mr. de Klerk's role in South Africa during apartheid and in the transition of democracy? Just to kick off this discussion, what's your sense today?
Well, my sense is that that South Africa is divided on the legacy of FW de Klerk as it is divided on so many other questions. However one may look at the situation from one's preferences or dislikes, the fact remained that FW de Klerk led the process that moved South Africa from apartheid to constitutional democracy. And it was a very difficult process. So you have the record that, as with all political figures, you're going to have widely differing views regarding the motives, the merits involved in the actions of the man.
Yeah, former President Kgalema Motlanthe telling my colleague Puleli Tutu-Jones earlier today in Pretoria that in his view, FW de Klerk stepped forward at a time when it was really difficult to facilitate that transition. I don't know whether or not Mr. Nyhontso, the PAC, would agree with that.
Definitely, I won't agree. I won't agree with that. We don't share that sentiment. That de Klerk occupied a special place in South Africans' heart is not true. He occupies that special place in Kgalema Motlante's heart. He must not speak on behalf of South Africans. We have scars from de Klerk. De Klerk has got blood in his hands. He killed innocent kids in Umtata in 1995. He killed so many families. The families, the Kalata families, Craddock 4, they want answers. De Klerk never came up. He never went to the Truth Commission and being interrogated for what he did. So many people were killed under his own watch, even after the so-called unbanning of political parties. People were killed. 1993 was 3 years after the killing of, after the opening of political parties. And yes, so we disagree.
So you still hold him responsible for that period of transition where we saw that violence you're mentioning in the early 90s and the emergence of the so-called third force?
Not only in that period, when he served in the government, when he was in cabinet in the 70s and the 80s, when he killed people in Boy Patong, so many people were killed under de Klerk, and he never apologized. At some point, he even said
he has
he did
now.
not believe
But he has recently apologized. He has issued an unqualified apology.
What is recently? Why the foundation had to wait until he died and then release a pre-recorded video? The apology, even in that circus that was called the Truth Commission, people were interrogated. You had to tell them what did you do? How did you do it? Why did you do it? And then they would consider to forgive you. He was never interrogated anywhere. We opened the case against him. We wanted him to go to court and answer for his sins. Families that did never get closure. People died, just perished. Pinzi Zaba was killed in Nanda in KZN in 1991. And his throat was slit after being killed under de Klerk. Where did de Klerk ever go and apologize? Why the foundation waited until de Klerk die, and then release a video.
Yeah, I'll allow Mr. Steward to respond to that a little bit later on, but I need to bring in Father Michael Lapsley first. Mr. Steward, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to why did you wait until now, a question that Mr. Nyhontso is asking, to release that apology video. Father Michael Lapsley, as far as I recall, thank you very much for joining us, you were a direct victim of a bomb that was sent to you in 1990, I think, in April or thereabouts, if my memory serves me well. You've had your chance. I saw a little bit of a clip from you talking to one of my colleagues at eNCA yesterday, but we thought we should bring you in as part of this conversation as well today. 24 hours later, you reflecting on what we are just hearing now from Mr. Steward and Mr. Nyhontso, and with your experience way back in 1990, how do you feel about FW de Klerk's legacy currently?
Well, thank you. I want to firstly express my condolences to Dave, obviously a lifelong colleague of FW, as well as to his family and all the people in the foundation. I think it is problematic to speak from the grave when there can be no rejoinder to that. In my case, as you said, I received the letter bomb in April of 1990, 3 months after the release of Nelson Mandela. When I gave evidence to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I said that I held FW politically and morally responsible for my bombing. The reason was that I was attempted assassination by a death squad within the machinery of the apartheid state, of which de Klerk was the president. Now, he says, I saw nothing, I knew nothing, I did nothing. Now, the late Van Zyl Slabbert said to me, I went to FW. I spoke to him about the death squads, and FW chose to do nothing to disband those death squads, which is why I say he has political and moral responsibility for what happened to me. But also for my comrade from the PAC, it is in that period of him receiving the Nobel Peace Prize that there were the killing of the children that he referred to in Umtata. And also, there has never been any reckoning. There's never been an account of the role that FW played as the head of the State Security Council, at which decisions were made. I don't know whether Dave himself was a member of that State Security Council, and which decisions were made to kill people, to kill activists, like the Cradock Four. So when I first heard about de Klerk's death, I immediately thought of Lukanya, of the Cradock Four, and of other people who were still waiting for accountability. And then partly, of course, that also raises a question, was there a deal between de Klerk and our democratic government on not going ahead with prosecutions, which should have gone ahead and were recommended by the TRC?
Okay.
And maybe Dave can tell us whether he was party to those behind-the-scenes deal that have meant there has been no accountability for the killings on the watch of FW. And of course, he makes an apology, but there's nothing, he's always ducked the question of the scale of killings, the scale of torture. He often spoke of bad apples. And of course, it's not long ago that he said it's not true that apartheid was a crime against humanity. And I believe Dave is the speechwriter, so presumably Dave wrote that speech in which de Klerk said that apartheid was not a crime against humanity.
There are a number of points, Dave, that Mr. Steward, that have been put to you by Father Lapsley and as well as Mr. Nyhontso. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to cover. Of course, you started by saying
well, look, we
are divided.
Where does one begin with all of this? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission had at its disposal all of the documentation from the State Security Council, from witnesses, from testimonies relating to illegal actions taken by the former government. They could find nothing, absolutely nothing, to link FW de Klerk to any decision to perpetrate a crime against humanity or a violation of gross violation of human rights. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had all of that at its disposal, but it did not succeed in finding anything to
was there a deal? Was there a deal? Sorry, Mr. Stewart. Was there a deal?
No, wait. No, I'm trying to answer the questions now. I'll come to that. There was nothing that was found by the TRC to associate de Klerk with any kind of gross violation of human rights. In fact, Archbishop Tutu's biographer, John Allen, wrote in his biography of Archbishop Tutu, called The Rabble Rouser for Peace, he said that the findings of the TRC relating to de Klerk were embarrassing in their paucity and their inability to link him to anything of this kind. So the TRC, with all of these resources at its disposal, could not find this because it did not exist. As for de Klerk's record in terms of the security forces and the ghastly attack on Reverend, on our co-panelist here, it was nothing to do with what de Klerk was all about. One of the first things he did when he took over as president was to gather the officer corps of the police and the military in separate meetings, at which he told them, the struggle is over. Your job is now simply to defend the country and to maintain law and order. But there were elements within the security forces that were clearly acting against his orders and his instructions.
But he was the political head.
Wait a second. There were elements on all sides that wanted to destroy the negotiation process. On the far right, they wanted to have violence and they wanted to have mayhem and bloodshed. So they were working absolutely against de Klerk's policy of changing South Africa and beginning negotiations. Why should de Klerk, on the one hand, risk his political career to launch negotiations to unban the SACP and the PAC and the ANC, to release Nelson Mandela, if his objective at the same time is to carry on with an underhand war? It's just simply not true.
Okay, Mr. Stewart, we're going to just take a quick break. We'll continue this discussion. The point is somebody has to take accountability. He was the political head. He's the head of state. There's this big machinery that's been set up by the apartheid government, of which he was a head for quite some time. Yes, he's now wanting to embrace change and the transition, but people are still dying. That's what we're hearing now. But then it's a very interesting time that somebody who got the Nobel Peace Prize is still being viewed very, very, very suspiciously in terms of his intentions at the time. But we'll continue to talk about that. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Just stay connected. This is, of course, The Lead on eNCA.